Thank you, David, for your generous introduction. Also, Jaya, thanks for your insightful presentation. Just some corrections. I had my master's and PhD in Canada at McMaster University at Gettysburg College. I was a professor of philosophy and peace and justice studies. So that's my background. Of my academic side, I have many different hats in my life, karmic life you can call also. Yes, I was born in Sri Lanka. My grandmother always tell me a story. I was born during a riots, ethnic riots between minority and majority. And the curfew was passed, and my dad couldn't take my mother to the hospital for delivery. So my grandmother had to come home and help my mother to deliver me. And I was born in the midst of violence. And my grandma said that when I carried you, unlike other kids, other babies, you didn't scream or cry, you just smiled. And I got scared. And I always wonder what is that cultural symbolic meaning of a baby smiling. So when I think about it, whoever born in that period of time as a minority Tamil, probably all their life they grew up with violence and war. I left Sri Lanka in the late early 90s to Canada for my graduate studies. So since then, even I was involved in human rights and health issues, mental health issues. So I've been always tuned into that context of life about violence, why people engage in violence, why people do to each other and to the nature and wildlife and animals, why they are fighting. All my life that's I dedicated to study. And also when I was young university lecturer back in Sri Lanka, in the midst of war, I ended up engaging in going to the military camp and negotiating with the people and to release my students. One of my basketball captain one day just disappeared. And at the end of that period of time, one of my colleagues, she was an amazing feminist, a mentor for me. He spoke against recruiting children for war, and she was killed. So I just fled to Canada. I was so lucky to have a scholarship to go to Canada. But not many people didn't have that luxury or have the privilege to flee. So I didn't flee Sri Lanka as a refugee or asylum seeker, but as an exile who stand for human rights and face consequences. When I went to Canada, I was like a wounded animal. Like usually in our culture, it takes 30 days to go through the grieving process to overcome the loss. But I didn't have that opportunity. I just fled. And I didn't have a community, a family to grieve together. All the losses I have, my friends, my family, my colleague, and so forth. So, small thing, when you go to a different country as a migrant, a foreign student, just to get to know, moving from 2 seasons from Sri Lanka to 4 seasons of Canada, which I never seen a winter before. I remember going to my Professor Ballet's office and say, this is my second week in a fall, it's getting cold, and the sun is sort of going down at 4:30 in the evening, depressing, dark, which I'm not familiar from a tropical country I came from. So I asked Professor Valle, that he's a French professor, and said, I have some itchiness on my skin and I don't know whether I need to see a doctor, it's a rash or something. And he said, Raj, can I see your hand? And he looked at me and said, Raj, you don't have a rash, it's simply dry skin, Raj. That's what we call in Canada. What you need is lotion, not a doctor. So simple thing. As a migrant, you move from one space, a cultural space, an environmental space, to move to another space. You have to be resilient to adjust while carrying this PTSD, post-traumatic disorder, and trauma coming from there, and to accommodate learning English language, comprehending the lecture, writing thesis, running tutorial class. And then I felt lonely and depressed of that, and never systematically dealt with PTSD. And I used to go to a psychiatrist and say, this is my problem, and they looked at me and, lost in translation, words. I didn't have the right words to explain how I feel, think, and they didn't have a political, cultural context about feelings. Because more and more think about it, counseling is not necessarily simply science, but also culture, how you feel and express your feeling, that words, you need to have the right words. So those are the things sort of went through my thing. I couldn't get a proper healing or counseling or anything, so I had to do by myself. And that is here, the Canadian wonderful community, like many of you probably are already doing, to hold them. My professors are exceptional. I was drawn to their wings. And to make sure that I am not lonely and supported well, I'm doing well. So that's how way I grew up. So my story is not far from the asylum seekers and refugees now we are having here. The only difference is I was privileged. I got a scholarship. I went as a person and become an exile, whereas they didn't have a chance to finish their grade 10 or 12 or university, couldn't speak English. They had to flee. Just to live, just to survive. And then at an early stage in Canada, a lot of people came and they got the, residence and citizenship. They were free from that fear of death. But the recent government policy changed that as illegal aliens. In the US, they call here the illegal old people. But the Human Rights Charter that was created immediately after Second World War didn't talk about anything illegal about fleeing for your life. Women flee for their life when they had a terrible, horrifying experience with their partner. People in the wars, when they flee for their life, just to live for another day. So that's how I worked, and then I kind of ended up studying about violence, teaching about violence. I became a director of peace and justice studies at Gettysburg College and taught 10 years of generation of students during the 9/11, where the boys wants to go to war, and we have the peacenik boys here, students, and we had such a wonderful, meaningful discussion in my human rights class, beyond terrorism class, war and the environment class. I taught different type, not the traditional academic type of course, but to something meaningful in that life context of my students. So one of the things I never deviated was that when I went to as a young lecturer in the northern part, I was shocked, and my innocence sort of teared apart when I see all these horrible things around me. Narrowly survived from an interrogation for mistaken identity and survived. I still remember the glass eyes of my interrogator and the beard. So I never deviated from that experience, and to systematically say why people have to do these things to each other. And that's my academic life, my research life, and then I find asylum in storytelling and art. How do I explain to young children in the US about war and suffering and dying who never experienced? So it is the art, and art came to rescue me to give a picture of the people that I work with. So when I came to Australia, I went back to say I really want to be a healer, not giving lectures, concepts and theories and research, but need to do some work. So I went to Monash for my 4th degree. I did my counseling, went back and worked for 10 years in 4 different prominent Australian organizations directly work with asylum seekers. So the asylum seekers have 3 traumas they experience. And I work with culture, 7 different cultures, many languages with interpreters I work. Even though I speak Tamils and the Sri Lankans are there, with them I speak in Tamil, and other people I work with in thing. One of the things I have a commitment to go there is that this is what happened to me when I went to a different culture, couldn't speak well, express well my mental health issue. I'm going to speak in their language and to work with them. And it was a joy to work with them, even though the stories that you hear from them is heart-wrenching, hard, difficult. And as I said, they have gone through 3 different things. The war in Gaza, or in Iran, or in Afghanistan, or Sri Lanka, or Myanmar. All of them are same type of violence, because the military system has an international conferences and training and exchange and the different, or same type of weapons and the method. So you see, as a counselor, I see the same patterns of torture tools, the goals and what they do. So I sort of, that's the PTSD, the response to that kind of traumatic events, PTSD, post-traumatic disorder, nightmares, intrusive thought, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, suicidal action. And these are the things, they come with heaviness to your room. And as a counselor, I don't want to ask another intrusive question, because they always felt the questions asked at the immigration department, even though it's a professional setting, that triggered them about the interrogation room. They ask questions, probing questions. So I kind of thought, I'm not going to use that Western method and to build a professional wall between me and them, but to open up that, to create a safe space and trusting space for them to talk. And that's one of the methods I kind of developed because I lived in the war. Often they say, if you are traumatized, you cannot be a counselor. That's not the case. When you look at the First World War, Second World War, all the psychiatrists, psychologists, they were in the war. They lived in the war. They traumatized, but then they heal each other. So my experience living in, recovering, recycling that process actually became a source for me to give. That's how I interpreted my relationship with my clients. And the second trauma they have, beside the war in their country, is coming to Australia, the traveling in the ocean with big waves, without learning how to swim and without life jacket. I remember one of my clients crying, a father shaking, and he lost his only daughter when he was crossing the ocean and is broken. and she slipped from his lap, and he couldn't find in the dark water. And it sort of touched you. You don't have words as a counselor to talk about it, to touch them gently. So I write that. And sometimes I write as a poem and read back to them as a poetic therapy in a gentle way. And there's a Muslim woman, she said, Raj, it was terrible in this boat and it's shaking and rough. And this mother, young mother, she thought she's going to die, and she brought this baby and gave it to me. And my client is a very wise older woman. I could see why this younger woman kind of gave this baby, because she thought she's going to die in the journey. And then you have these inspiring stories you hear from clients said, well, Raj, we were almost dying, starving, lost the direction, and then we saw a pod of dolphins swimming in front of our boat, and it was the hope. And I take this client and go to in Perth in the school, and he will tell the story and I will translate. And the kids would be all tears up and line up and shake his hand because they heard about this incredible compassion of dolphins and the connection with that man. And the third trauma they had, which in my 7 years, that's what I experienced, is the constant rejection of protection visa. So they suffered a trauma in the war, they suffered the trauma in the journey in the ocean, and then the rejection and the fear that the government may send them back to their countries, so the torturers are waiting for them. So this is the way, as a counselor, I try to write them stories and to read them back to them and to see what kind of hope as a counselor you could just give for another day. Because you know they may get a rejection. You work with the lawyers and you know how the case is going to go. And I had a couple of students try couple of times suicide, and to take them to emergency, make sure they are fine and give some hope in a hopeless situation. So, and I thought these stories have to be heard from the ordinary Australians, stories, not statistics, not numbers, just stories. So I began to write, and there was an inspiring woman I met in a very early stage of counseling. And you know, in the counseling sometimes they assess you and you assess them. And she was quiet, and it took some time for her to finally trust me and open up. And she told me about a story. And she said, I had female counselors but I was not there with a translator to open up. Now I'm speaking your language, and I am going to tell my story. So now I'm going to invite Shruti, one of my, a student from Monash University. Is a brilliant student in the Dean's List. And she studies arts and law, and she's very much passionate about the rights of women. And again, we were talking about different generations, older generation and the new generation. She was born here, I was migrated. Their parents, where are they? They have gone? Yes, Shankar is their Professor Vadavan. He teaches at the university here. So she and I kind of work on this poetry, and she kind of read and edit sometime. And I wanted to ask her to read the first poem. Shankar, what do you think? It's called Confession, about the story of this woman who told the story, what happened to her when she was 16 years old.
Unforgiving confession. In a locked room, stripped bare. So the title of the poem is Unforgiving Confession. In a locked room, stripped bare, the soldiers touch an unbearable humiliation. A cage of water, she drowns in fear. Terror, shame, a rope of emotion grips her throat. Only 16, her dignity lost. The gun barrels lean against the wall, a triggering fear for her life, her jaw locked. Only 16, she dared not dream of escape. The denial of reality wrapped her in false safety, a cruel disguise for her frailty. Only 16, he rushed. Bring her out, the captain's voice roared. Tears poured down her cheeks as she walked towards her father. Don't tell anyone, your family will be in danger. The captain's voice echoed in her ear. Whispers followed them on their way home. Enraged and helpless, her father went to church to confess. Days passed, soldiers came knocking, surrounding, questioning, thunder rumbling. A finger behind him, the trigger is pulled. Her heart jolts. Did the priest challenge the captain?
Thank you. So in the story, in the end, the military came back and thought she's going to tell this to the community. And the father talked to the priest at the church, so they came and eliminated her father. That's a story. And then later part of her life also a lot of things happened. So this is one part of the story. The second story about a witness at the camp, refugee camp. A mother witnessed what happened to another woman who had been taken by a group of soldiers. Go slow.
This poem is called Cleansing in Red Soil. In the refugee camp, water dripped from the rusted pipe, wetting the red soil. She sat beneath the pipe, allowing the droplets to soak her through, as she softly murmured to herself. Refusing to be clothed, she cleansed herself. In the raw purity of the mud, there was nothing to hide. Beyond dignity, mere existence held no meaning for her. A circle of women gathered around her to shield her honor, but that notion held no sense for her. Concealing her in vain, the women around her grasped the melting meaning of their own experiences, quietly holding on, never losing their grip on their haunting memories of rapes endured. Confused children watched in naked silence.
So all cultures have a certain form of meaning system. That meaning system actually holds us to be who you are. And making sense of meaning, one of the Holocaust survivors said that war, what does to violence and war, what does to people is to tear apart that meaning system. When meaning system collapse, people collapse. So when you talk to refugees, or traumatized people, they will talk things in fragmentation. So as a counselor, you have to pick up that fragmentation and pull together and gel together as a story. In this story, both stories, they didn't tell the whole stories. I was just pulling things together and knit together. Oh, this probably happened, this has happened. And because language collapsed when trauma happened. The third story, sometime, this is about a man, 56 years old man, all his children and wife is back home, waiting for 12 years for visa, rejection after rejection after rejection, with the suicidal thoughts, ideation in his mind. And I couldn't find to penetrate his deep darkness of depression as a counselor. Then I kind of resort to ecotherapy. So I started talking about, tell me about your village. tell me about your youth. And he suddenly opened up, happiness in his face, talk about his paddy field, where his father has a long, big paddy field. He's the son of a farmer, and immediately he's lit up. All the depression I find is gone. So here I started working ecotherapy with them. This is the story called Songs of the Paddy Field. Paddy is another word for rice, yes.
A gentle breeze wafts through the endless green of the paddy fields to create rolling waves. The winds embrace soothes his spirit. The tracks of mud crabs in the mire lead to a quiet trench. A choir of croaking frogs erupting from the murk sets a beat in his heart. At the age of 12, he flew with the wind along Varangu, water fences built with mud clay, tightly held by stubborn roots of the grass. A nearby pond full of vira and paneyanin fish to feed the village, nesting birds not far from the pond. Aged 104, his grandpa died, leaving behind a cherished village, once full of undisrupted pride. War shattered the core of the wild and shook the inner core of his existence. An unprepared child, he felt disconnected, as the nesting birds flew away, never to return to the mist of bombing. His sweet childhood days turned into nightmares of squabbling crocs tearing apart the flesh of a wild bull. Life in the village was destroyed. Hardened combat desecrated its fields, and the songs of the paddy field were drowned by woeful cries. Waking up to gusty winds and dust filled with pain, he now faces a barren paddy field, trampled by brutal battle tanks.
So here that he could revisit that life of their young, happy, spirited life, and suddenly in trauma and the war and the violence, that the person, that lovely young boy just died inside. So as a counselor, to dig in that, with that clients, to go with that, and all these poems I asked permission. I even invited to come and join today. He said he loved to see this you all, but he said I am sick, I couldn't make it today. Thank you. So the fourth poem, I have 5 poems, I have 2 more. I'm sort of difficult for me to read my own words, so be patient with me. This is a client I saw, he rarely whispered a word. He couldn't trust anyone. He had been through heavy torture, heavy trauma, and barely, it took up 3 months for me to go gently and slowly. Finally, he told what happened to him and the grief that he gone through very beautifully, he said. So the title of this poem is Shoes of Guilt. For days and nights, the shelling did not cease, a relentless barrage. The morning before, his mother lost her life when the shelling began at dawn's first ray. In the fleeting moment of calm, nobody knew what happened, what transpired on the other side. Perhaps the soldiers took a break, brushed their teeth, lit a cigarette, say hello to their young wives and newborns by phone, cracked a joke, laughed in their safe zone. On this side, they hid in the rotten cover of a bunker. These are the refugees, disoriented by eerie sound of discharge. their mouth parched with thirst for water. The blast from last night still echo in their ears. Debris strewn across on the ground, headless coconut trees, broken palmyra trees, slain animals, smashed houses, burned vehicles, scenes of endless fright. The rattling breath of the dying, a rush mourning of Opari, a songs for the dead. In Tamil culture, Opari is the word we use for healing culturally in funerals. What else there is left to destroy? The refreshed soldiers return for another round of barrage, heavy artillery guns, multi-barrel guns, bombardments from ships, helicopters, fighter planes, shells, and cluster bombs. A deluge from all corners, escaping from the shelling of death is like an avoiding drop of rain. Survivors left in their mind behind as they ran without direction. His lungs could not pump enough to power his sprint for life. He prayed the goddesses would hold an umbrella from the vicious rain of strife. Ayyo! A piercing scream from behind. His mother was down. He could not stop to catch her breath or hold her in her final moment. No goodbye, no party, no funeral. Couldn't forgive himself. So all his life, he was carrying that guilt. I couldn't stop from running to go and hold my mother. I didn't do a proper rituals. So these are the kind of reality often people face in the room. I have one short poem. And final thing is, trauma is often forgetting. This is another client came to my room. Called Sinking in Forgetting. I had so much to say when I came to see you, but now I have forgotten it all. He smiles. With blameless child, I couldn't remember a thing, he repeats. Then I remember it all. I tell you and talk to you about all those things I remember. What do you mean? Counselor interrupts with surprise. Well, I spoke to you all the time when I shower, while cooking, while eating, while on the street, crossing the road, even in my sleep in the dreams. But now you are here now, sitting in front of me. I don't remember a thing that I want to tell you. He scratches his head, revealing hidden scars behind his hair, marks of gun butts, itchiness from torture, he mutters. Then he sinks into a state of blankness, lost in the abyss of forgetting. This is the reality of our refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Raj, rather than sitting there, I'm going to invite you and Jaya, please, to come and sit at the front. We're going to have opportunity for now just 10 minutes of questions to both our speakers. And again, I'm going to pass across to Kamla to moderate those questions, please.
Thank you, David. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you, Dr. Raj, for your very heart-wrenching account of these trauma victims and the impact on their well-being. And your poetry really touched me emotionally.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely well. Thank you.
Right. It's all such a wonderful to work with a different generation. It was born here and to looked at themes rather than the stereotype. They said the young generation don't care.
Thank you. Right, let's go to the questions. Yes, we have got
Hypnotherapy work in trauma situations or?
Pardon?
Hypnotherapy, does it work in trauma situations?
It depends on the client's capacity because they are already fragile. So any intrusive treatment, I don't know much about hypnotherapy, but any intrusive treatment would be much more harmful to them. So I usually avoid that one. I go very gently from the outskirt and go deeper later when they are allowing and open to that counseling.
Thank you.
yes, here Jane. Jane has got a question.
That was really interesting, Raj, so thank you. I mean, Jay's was interesting too, but they were just so different, and that was fantastic. The question I wanted to ask you, Raj, was does the university recommend that people should come to you for counselling, or do they seek you out, or what happens in that respect?
No university has approached me about counseling work. I work with different organizations like Red Cross or Foundation House or other places which I have my passion. All these therapies, I go away a little bit from the standard therapies and to see what is culturally appropriate for them, and that create a safe space for them to talk. So this is one of the therapy I developed, reading, learning with trust, and read back to them. So that's my creative part of my work.
So how long would they stay with you?
Some of them 2 to 3 years, 4 years, some of them quickly recover, go back to work. It depends on different people have and their bodies react to trauma different ways. Some people can, next day, a big hard battle, go to the next battle in the war situation, but some people it hits them 1 week later, 2 weeks later, 6 months later, 10 years later, it depends. It varies. So.
Thank you.
Please raise your hands if you have a question, either for Jaya or Dr. Raj. There's one, Isa.
Jaya mentioned something that actually clicked with me when she said that life is in the airport divine, the divinity of life. And that said something to me about me being a parent. So according to what Jaya said, and I respect that very much, is that my 2 children were 2 divine people that I have to bring to this world. Right? But with them came no manual of how to treat these 2 divine, precious things. So going through a bit of my life there, I say, oh my God, I've done so many things wrong as a parent, right? In raising my kids. And all the things that you're saying about things that are wrong in the society, that are the wars, the terrible human conditions in so many different countries, are all human based. We have created out after raising wrongly our kids, right? I'm talking about our grandparents, for the existing, the existing rulers, the existing system, is our product, right? I was only in a miniature thing in raising 2 children, maybe the wrong values that I had, or in any other circumstances. How are we going to, and this is really the heart of the question, how are we going to correct this mismanagement of our kids? We are creating those, bastards that are doing such wrong things. Where is the attempt to correct raising children? If you want to stop it, really, you have to stop it from the childhood. It's too late when it's gone to the adulthood, gone to the management thing, and then we want to correct the system. You have to start it from childhood, in my view. But where is the system, or who is thinking of that? Of to educate the parents, newly parents, how to bring the child in a correct way. Sorry, it took a bit of long way to get to the question.
I guess, when I became a mum and I chose to be a stay-at-home mum for 5 years, I viewed that as the most important job in my life. Yet I had no manual. No one gives you a parenting manual. And it's so much about, like you said, trial and error. We've all made mistakes. I don't think you need to give yourself a hard time about that. I think we've all made errors in how we bring up our children. But I think, like you said, it has to start young. We at Indian Care, we have parenting programs, so we're trying our best in that way. But yeah, I think maybe we need to have more of those parenting type of programs, and not assume that once you have children that you will know how to give them the right values. Maybe we need some education around that. But I don't know, Raj, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question that you asked. I was thinking about different generation. For example, probably the older generation had children in their own country, parents are there, and the school teachers are there, friends, community, that's all. When they come here, their life, new generation, that life is complex, that social media is in there. Unless the parents grow in social media, they know how to manage it because they grew up with that social media. That is an external factor influencing, shaping young children's behavior, from music to everything, right? And then in addition, the drugs deal that 50 years ago, this level of flow of drugs is not part of life. So the younger generation has much more complex, difficult life than the life we had as a young people, because so much of influences and they have to make choices. So that's what I think places like Headspace, a mental health organization for children, are very helpful if they have young challenges. So it's a different context, different challenges. Yes.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to have to call it a day there. We obviously have to move on with the rest of our days, tidy up the hall and so on. So I just want to finish with thanks, particularly to our 2 speakers, to Jaya and to Raj. It has been a great pleasure to hear you both, and if we had the hall for a few more hours, I could sit here and listen to so much more. It's just been a lovely afternoon. I think you'll all agree with me. So I'd like to say thank you to Jaya. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please feel free to go and take